The laughter started before Lena Cole even finished speaking. She stood at the front of the training hall on version 9, holding her data pad tightly, reading from a record she had memorized long ago. The hall was wide, cold, and serious. The kind of place designed to remind everyone that what happened inside mattered. 42 cadets from 6 species sat in tiered rows, each confident, each trained, each certain of their own value. Commander Sale Vaughn sat in the third row, his preferred spot. The third row felt present without desperation. He was a craft with 4 arms, a rigid forehead, and a presence that made chairs look small. He had entered the advanced program with 11 commendations and a reputation that walked ahead of him. A sharp clicking sound came from his throat, a noise that meant disbelief and mockery. It echoed through the room like a warning. Lena paused, lowered her pad. The cultural exchange exercise was Director Pellin's idea. Each cadet presented one legendary warrior from their species. Not the strongest, not the most decorated, but someone whose story showed what their people were made of under impossible odds. It was meant to build understanding. So far, it had only created a quiet, unnamed competition. Vaughn went first, speaking about Warlord Sarath of the Ciari. 4-armed, a conqueror of 3-star systems in under a decade. Not by numbers, but through strategy, so precise it became part of the Academy's curriculum. No one survived against Sarath unscathed, and every Ciari soldier knew his name before they knew their own ranks. Vaughn told the story with the pride of repetition, expecting the exact reaction he got. Then Yara Ox spoke. Tall, pale Thulian with eyes that had no name in most languages. She told of Vel, a mine commander who faced 600 enemy warships and dismantled them without firing a weapon. Vel had entered the enemy mines and shown them a complete end until none could continue. The room went quiet in a way that wasn't for show. Then Director Pellin said Lena's name. She stepped forward and told the story of George Hartwell. Not a general, not a mind warrior, just a human soldier, part of a unit forced into retreat. A narrow mountain pass lay ahead, and someone had to hold it so the others could escape. Hartwell stayed. 11 hours. His weapon broke in the second hour. He used the rocks, the terrain, and a single decision he never reconsidered. When his unit returned, he was still there. Vaughn clicked his tongue around the 7th sentence. No energy weapons, he said, not quite a question. None. None at all. The laughter spread. Some cadets laughed openly, others with subtle expressions. Even the quieter ones let their guard down. Yara Ox did not laugh. She pressed 2 fingers to her temple and looked at Lena. What you described, she said, is one soldier holding a position. A legend shapes events beyond itself. Vel changed the course of a war. Hartwell preserved a unit. The word legend carries weight. It cannot be reduced. Lena held her gaze for 3 full seconds. Then she picked up her pad, returned to her seat, and sat down. Connor Webb, 2 seats over, leaned in. You're not going to respond? He whispered. No, Lena said. Not because she didn't care. Because she already knew. Our legends are not meant to be grand. They are what they are. Connor exhaled slowly, filing the moment away to the back of the hall. Admiral Owen Vaser sat alone. 71 years old, limp from an old injury, uniform plain and gray. He had heard everything. The laughter, Yara Ox's judgment. He sipped water quietly, calm, like a mountain that had seen every kind of storm and simply waited. Lena glanced at him. He nodded once. Not encouragement, not sympathy, just acknowledgement. A small private smile touched her lips before disappearing. Vaughn had already moved on to something else entirely. That was always how it started. The veterans' reception was held on level 6 of the Academy Station, a long hall with high arched ceilings and observation panels stretching along one wall, showing the stars beyond. The room was built for moments like this, where history hung in the air, felt by everyone present. Coalition portraits lined the walls, each showing a celebrated commander in the formal posture of their species. 4-armed Ciari generals standing wide. Thulian admirals with eyes half closed in measured authority. Draven fleet commanders frozen in motion. No human portraits, Lena had noticed the absence the first time she entered the room, but said nothing. She didn't now either. The veterans arrived in order of recognition, which usually meant importance. Hask Rowe entered first, unsurprising. The most decorated soldier alive, veteran of 7 major campaigns, over 50 years, never on the losing side of a decisive battle. Even retired for 6 years, his presence commanded attention. He moved through the room like a center of gravity, drawing instinctive respect. Other veterans followed, Thulian officers with their stillness, Draven commanders with precise arm crossings, Polari advisors in their careful clusters. Each species had its own unspoken rituals of respect. Then the human delegation arrived. For in total, General Francis Alcott, retired, a coalition fleet commander with a clean record. Colonel Derek Shaw, too young for his rank, but the record explained why. Communications Specialist Paul Greer, quiet and unassuming. Admiral Owen Vaser, walking last, limp, uniform plain gray, unnoticed by most. Vaughn, near the central table with a group of CRE officers, glanced at them. He noted Alcott's rank as worthy of acknowledgement. The rest? Administrative, likely, he concluded, and returned to his conversation. Lena observed quietly. Connor tensed beside her. "Don't," she said softly. "I was about to," he whispered. "No," Lena replied. "He does not need your judgment. That is the point." Connor stayed silent. Hask Rowe naturally drew an audience. He spoke quietly, commanding attention without performance. Cadets leaned in, listening without thinking about showing respect. It was automatic. Vaser, at the far observation panel, stood alone. Not excluded, not ignored. The room had nothing it needed from him, and he needed nothing from the room. He was calm, entirely unbothered. Later, Vaughn crossed to the refreshment table and reached past Vaser without acknowledgement, just as one would past a chair. Vaser shifted slightly, and Vaughn noticed the small, quiet acknowledgement. Hask Rowe saw it too, subtle as a shadow passing over his face before it disappeared. Throughout the reception, Vaughn engaged junior officers, speaking of past campaigns, 14 ground engagements across 2 fronts. His audience agreed readily. Vaser filled his water glass quietly, heard every word, expression unchanged. Lena felt the familiar weight in her chest. Not anger, not sadness, but the quiet awareness of how visible things can hide true scale. Connor leaned closer. "Why do you let it go?" "Because some things are not meant to be seen," Lena said softly. "You learn more by observing than by proving." Vaser remained at the window, water in hand, eyes on the stars. Small pins on his collar caught the light, unnoticed by most. The galaxy stretched beyond, indifferent, and he seemed at home within it. Lena watched for a long moment, understanding the patience required by such people. Later that night, Yara Ox could not sleep. Not from stress or doubt, she never did. From curiosity, from questions that would not let her rest. She pulled out her small terminal, searching. She wanted to know what Owen Vaser had done. Public records were thin, sparse citations, 2 commendations from an outer engagement, a 4-sentence note about Yolan Station. Then gaps, years unrecorded. Something was missing, deliberate, like pieces carefully hidden elsewhere. Yara went to the common area. Lena was already there, sitting quietly, cup in hand, data pad closed. Yara sat across, no words yet. "I looked up Vaser," she said. Lena nodded. "His public record is almost empty. For an admiral, that's unusual." "Yes," Lena agreed. Yara pressed. "Is there more that we're not seeing?" Lena paused, then activated her pad, navigating protocols beyond Yara's clearance. She turned the screen toward her. "I can show parts," she said. "Not all, but enough." The first entry, 28 years ago, a young sergeant at Callus 4 Relay Station. 12 humans defending against 400 enemy combatants. 9 days, 11 alive at the end. Tactical decisions, rotations, improvised fortifications. Vaser listed simply as the unit's NCO, key decisions understated. The second entry, a minor campaign, the Marin engagement. Human platoon disrupted enemy coordination without support, satellites, or vehicles. Terrain, observation, Handmade maps prevented strikes that could have cost tens of thousands. Classified, unsighted. Why hide this? Yara asked. Security, Lena said. But also, because if people saw it, it would shift how the galaxy views humanity too quickly. They weren't ready. The third entry, Yolan Station. Evacuating civilians under attack. A single officer held a damaged access door open for 40 minutes. 3,114 civilians escaped. Left knee injured, never fully healed. Vaser did it alone. Why doesn't he speak of it? Yara asked. Because it never occurred to him to, Lena said simply. The stars outside held steady. Lena and Yara sat in silence, absorbing the quiet magnitude of what had been hidden in plain sight. The next day, the War Strategy Seminar was held in the main lecture hall, a tiered space designed for 60 cadets. 43 were present, along with 9 visiting officers and 1 retired admiral at the back, holding his cup of water. Director Pellin opened the session with the topic, the Battle of Drevens Pass. Known as the most catastrophic coalition failure in modern history, the battle had occurred 30 years ago. The Veiled Dominion, at the height of their expansion, had struck the Allied fleet and ground forces at a choke point, breaking them so completely that the retreat became a textbook case of disorganized withdrawal. Students studied it not to glorify defeat, but to learn how failure compounds when decisions collapse under pressure. Hask Rose sat front and center, invited for this session. The old general began with precise analysis. For 20 minutes, he dissected the coalition's mistakes, positioning errors, communication breakdowns, and moments where a different choice could have changed everything. No notes, no solmansip, pure authority from decades of study and experience at the battle itself. The cadets were captivated. Then a junior cadet, Tavar, raised a question, not to Hask Row, but to the back of the room. Admiral, he said, directing it at Vaser, I understand human forces were present at Drevens Pass. What role did they play in the coalition's difficulties? The room went quiet. Vaughn did not smile or object. Vaser set down his water and replied simply, I was at Drevens Pass. A statement so plain it carried weight without drama. I was a lieutenant, he continued, commanding a small ground unit on the left flank. I can describe what happened from that position, if useful. Director Pellin nodded. Vaser stayed seated, forcing the entire room to turn slightly toward him. His calm, unhurried tone made every word land clearly. He described the first day. The coalition held positions until the Veil flanking maneuver hit the left flank. Orders failed to arrive. Communication equipment was damaged. Units retreated instinctively. My unit received no retreat order. We knew the enemy pressed hard. We knew the position was vital. So we stayed, he said. For the next 72 hours, he continued in precise, clinical language, much like the reports Lena had shown Yara. Enemy numbers pressed from 3 directions. Minimal resources. Improvised defensive plans built from terrain and wreckage. Sleep rotations to keep the unit operational. Strategic forward pushes to disrupt enemy timing. Why the third day, coalition forces that had retreated began recovery. They discovered the human unit had not only held position but advanced, leaving the left flank intact. The first 48 hours were a loss, he said plainly. The final outcome? Contested withdrawal. Our unit made it possible. This is not in the public record. I share it because it was asked. The room was silent. Hask Row, seated front row, went completely still. Not discomfort, attentive focus. Then he did something remarkable. Row rose slowly to his full height and placed his lower right fist over his chest. A CRE salute reserved only for equals, not subordinates or commanders, but soldiers who had proven themselves undeniably. Vaser acknowledged it with a small nod. No ceremony. Normalcy resumed as he picked up his datapad. But the weight of what had happened was undeniable. In the 4th row, Tavar stared at his desk. Vaughn watched the back of Rowe's head, processing what had just happened. Something shifted in his expression, subtle, complex, the realization that his assumptions had been wrong. For the first time all week, he had nothing to say. Later, Vaughn found Vaser alone on the observation deck. Vaser stood at the curved window, looking out at the stars, nothing in hand. Vaughn approached. I was wrong about you, Vaughn said. You did not know, Vaser replied. I made assumptions I should not have, Vaughn admitted. Assumptions are efficient, Vaser said. Most of the time they serve you well. Sometimes they fail. Vaughn expected correction or gratitude, but Vaser simply stood, quiet, letting the truth exist without fanfare. Why did you say nothing at the cultural exchange? Vaughn asked. You were there. You heard it all. Vaser looked at the stars. It was not time yet. People must reach understanding on their own. A lesson handed to you carries no weight. I waited for the moment it would. Vaughn thought it over, reflecting on the reception, the seminar, Tavar's question. Slowly, he understood the patience and wisdom of Vaser's approach. After the seminar, the room remained quietly charged. Cadets and officers were processing what they had just witnessed. Vaughn, still unsettled, walked back to his quarters, his mind running over every detail. Across the station, Lena and Connor moved through the quiet corridors, their footsteps soft on the metal floor. Ver lingered behind the seminar hall, staring out into the stars. He thought about Sarah, the warlord of the CRE, the story he had told during the cultural exchange, and the pride he felt in it. Yet now, he felt a deeper resonance in the quiet courage of humans. He thought of Lena's composure, the way she had quietly presented Hartwell's story without dramatics. And he understood something he had not before. Vaser remained at the observation deck, alone. Lena and Connor had left him in that space, but his presence lingered in the minds of those who had watched him teach without teaching. There was no performance, no declaration of greatness, just an unshakable presence that shaped understanding simply by existing. Vor approached the edge of the deck later. Are all human soldiers like this? He asked quietly. Vaser considered him, eyes steady on the distant stars. Not all. We have fear, we have failure. But something emerges when the situation becomes impossible. Most species respond to difficulty by stopping. Humans respond by continuing. We fight not just to survive, but because something in us refuses to accept the only alternative. Vor digested the words slowly. It was a different kind of motivation, one not built on honor or recognition, but an innate persistence, a drive that could not be trained into someone. It existed already, waiting to be called. Vaser added, people do not build monuments to this. Those who perform these acts do so because the situation demands it, because they are present, and because no one else can. Monuments are for others, not for the ones who act. For nodded. He thought back to Lena Cole, walking calmly back to her seat in the training hall during the cultural exchange. The quiet understanding she carried had been unnoticed by most, but it left an impression on him that would not fade. Later that night, Lena reviewed more records privately, while Yara Ox had trouble sleeping. Yara had trained herself for mental discipline, but the questions about Owen Vaser's actions would not let her rest. She accessed the Coalition archive and found the public records thin, unusually sparse for a man of Vaser's rank. Lena explained the reason. Classified operations, methods they did not want the galaxy to understand, and the human approach itself, so effective it might destabilize other species' perceptions if made widely known. Yara realized she had been looking at incomplete information, and Lena offered what she could, partial access to the records. The first entry showed a young Vaser, a sergeant at Callus 4, holding a relay station against overwhelming numbers for 9 days with minimal resources. The second entry detailed a platoon in the Marin campaign, disrupting enemy coordination with nothing more than terrain knowledge and observation. The third entry, Yolan Station, described him holding a door manually for 40 minutes while 3,114 civilians evacuated, sustaining a lasting injury. Yara absorbed the quiet heroism, the decisions made without thought for recognition, and she understood why the galaxy at large had never known the full truth. You said there was a third entry? She asked finally. Lena nodded. The depth of human perseverance was now revealed in small, deliberate acts. The scale was not vast, but the impact, measured in lives saved and battles stabilized, was profound. Yara leaned back, quiet. I could not sleep tonight, she admitted. Yes, Lena said softly. Some things work on you that way. The stars outside held their positions, indifferent yet constant, much like the humans whose quiet strength had shaped events without announcement. The morning of graduation arrived. The main assembly hall was filled with cadets in formal dress, each species standing in their designated rows. Director Pellin began reading names, following the standard order. Connor Webb's name was called first. He stood immediately, following the human tradition. Lena Cole's name followed, and she stepped forward as well. Behind her, Connor remained standing. Other human cadets on the far side of the hall rose in acknowledgement. Then Hask rose from the visiting dignitaries section, without ceremony or signal. His CRE delegation followed seamlessly. One by one, the senior cadets and officers from other species began standing, responding naturally, almost instinctively, to the quiet shift that had occurred over the past week. Vaughn rose eventually, without looking around, as a personal decision rather than obligation. Then others, both individually and in small groups, joined in. The room came to its feet not because protocol demanded it, but because understanding had silently changed the atmosphere. The cadets and officers were responding to what they had witnessed, the quiet courage and disciplined heroism of humans, embodied in Lena and her peers. Lena stood at the front of the hall, calm and composed. She was not surprised, nor seeking validation. She simply allowed the recognition to exist. Her expression carried something gentle yet durable, a quiet pride not dependent on ceremony or applause. To the back of the hall. Owen Vaser had already risen. He stood as the first human name was called. As tradition dictated, his face calm and unreadable. But for a moment, something deeper shifted behind his eyes, an acknowledgement of the truth silently understood and confirmed by the room around him. The assembly concluded, but the effects lingered. The cadets, officers, and visiting dignitaries carried with them a new understanding of what it meant to act with courage, humility, and quiet determination. Vaughn, reflecting on the week, remembered Vaser at the observation deck, the silent lessons taught without words, the patience and timing of understanding. He realized that human heroism was not about spectacle, notoriety, or records. It was about presence, choice, and action at the moment it mattered most. The galaxy beyond the station continued, vast and indifferent. Yet inside, in that ordinary assembly hall and along the quiet corridors of the academy, a profound truth had been observed. Actions speak louder than reports. Quiet, unassuming acts of courage can shift outcomes, inspire others, and redefine the perception of a species. Lena Cole and Connor Webb walked out of the hall together, not seeking notice, not expecting it, but carrying the weight of their experiences lightly. Around them, cadets from 6 species moved with a subtle awareness that the measure of legend is not in titles or medals, but in the consequences of decisive, determined action. Outside, Owen Vaser looked once more at the stars from the observation deck. The galaxy sprawled endlessly, each point of light indifferent, but he stood entirely at ease within it. Time and recognition were unnecessary. The truth of what had been done, quietly and resolutely, was enough. And in that stillness, as cadets and officers processed what they had learned, the galaxy's future heroes had seen what it truly meant to carry courage and resolve in a universe that often measured greatness by spectacle rather than substance.